In today's video, we're going to look at switch expressions. This is a language feature that was introduced in Java 14, and it's meant to be an improvement over switch statements, which have been around a long time. A switch statement, as you would know, is a way of handling different possible values of a given input. Switch expressions do the same thing, and they do it better, and they also do a little bit more than that, as we're going to see. So we're going to look at a hands-on example of how using switch expressions instead of switch statements can make your code a lot better. To illustrate this, we're going to consider a scenario where for each day of the week, we want to output a different message. This is of course assuming that we're using the usual Gregorian calendar where there's 7 days in a week, Monday to Sunday, and we're going to output a different message for each day. So I'm just going to put together a method to do this. It's going to return a string which would be the message, and I'm going to call it getMessage of the day. And I'm going to use an integer as an input. The integer would represent which day it is. I always consider Monday to be the first day of the week. So I'm going to start from 1 for Monday up to 7 for Sunday. I'm just going to initialize the return value. It's just a blank string for now. And then I'm going to switch on the integer and specify the cases for each day of the week. So case 1 would be Monday. So I'm going to assign a message, Manic Monday. Let's duplicate this line. So we've got it 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 2 would be Tuesday. Let's just say we have a terrific Tuesday, which is quite rare to be honest. We go on to have a whirlwind Wednesday, a thumping Thursday, and if that wasn't enough, we go on to have a fabulous Friday, and then Super Saturday, and finally a nice relaxing and serene Sunday. And because this method returns a string, we're going to return the message from this method. So if we were to invoke this with a value of say 3 for Wednesday, let's do an output of the return value. As you may have expected, the output says Serene Sunday. It doesn't say Whirlwind Wednesday because switch statements require a break statement at the end of each case, unless of course you want to fall through to the next case. By default, cases fall through. So if it matches 1, it's going to do what you specified for case 1, but then it's going to keep falling through until either it hits a break statement or it just hits the end of the switch case. In this case, we haven't specified any break statements. So it matched with 3, but then it just went on to 4, 5, 6, and 7. And because this was the last assignment that took place, that ends up being our output. So this is really, a minor inconvenience, I would say, when it comes to switch statements. It's just that you have to remember to put in these break statements if you don't want to fall through to the following cases. So if we were to run this again, we should see the correct output. Now it says Whirlwind Wednesday. So this is one of the things that switch expressions allow you to improve upon, because they don't require you to put in break statements. So I'm just going to quickly rewrite this method. I'll leave the original one there, make a copy of it. I'll call it get expression of the day, and I'm going to rewrite this as a switch expression. So the way this would work is, as I said, we no longer need break statements, but the way the compiler would know that this is supposed to be a switch expression is that you would actually assign the result of it to a variable like this, or you could just return it from the method. And I need a semicolon down there. So this is something that we can't do with switch statements. We can't just assign the result of it from the switch, because the switch statement doesn't really return anything. A switch expression does. So that's the key difference here. And now we can see that the breaks have a red underline. The compiler is complaining that I shouldn't have breaks in a switch expression. So I'll have to remove all of those. So this is a alteration of the default behavior. There's no longer case fall through when it comes to switch statements. And what we can do here is we can use a new keyword, yield. Now what this means is this becomes the value that is returned from the switch statement or the switch expression. And this is the value that gets assigned to this variable. Yield is not to be confused with the yield function that we have when it comes to threading. This is a new keyword that was introduced in Java 14, specifically for the context of switch expressions. So now if we do it this way, and we match the value 3, it's just going to yield, well, with Wednesday, that gets assigned to the message, and that's what gets returned from this method. But you would notice here that there's a bit of red there. The compiler is still complaining, and it says that the switch expression does not cover all possible input values. Well, the input is an integer, and as you would know, the range of the int data type in Java is quite large. It's not possible for us to cover all of that. All we need to do really is to cover the 7 days of the week. So just to gain a better understanding of this, I'm just going to explain the concept of a partial function and a total function. A partial function is a function where you've got a set of inputs and a set of outputs, but not all possible inputs have a defined output. So in this example, you can see there's 5 possible inputs, but the number 2 doesn't have a specified output. And that's what makes this a partial function. A total function, on the other hand, does map every possible input to an output. So in this case, all the values 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have an explicitly defined output. So how does this relate to switch expressions? Switch expressions encourage you to write what we call total functions. In other words, you want to explicitly specify what you're going to do for each case. And that is considered best practice because you're being more explicit about how you're going to handle each case. And the way switch expressions help you with that is that it actually doesn't compile unless you specify a default, which is what I'm going to do here. I have to use yield again. And now the compiler is happy. And this is because we're using an integer as an input. Of course, we're not going to cover all possible values of integers. Instead, we're going to define a default. And this is okay. But there is a better way to do this. A recommendation in the book Effective Java by Josh Block, which is something that I would recommend to every Java developer. And what the recommendation says is that instead of using data types like integer or short to define your cases, you should really be using a fixed set of values that explicitly define your use cases. In this case, all we want really is to cover 7 different values to represent the 7 days of the week. So using int here is really bad practice. What we should be doing instead is to define an enum, because that lets us define our different values. For this domain, we just want the 7 days of the week. So if I define an enum with 7 days of the week as values, don't know why I put Saturday there twice. We can now use the enum as the switch instead of integer, and we can switch on the values of the enum. So this would be Monday, 2 would be Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. So once I've made this change, which is better practice, I no longer need the default. So if I get rid of this, the compiler no longer complains, because now it knows that we are covering every possible input. If I were to remove this, for example, the compiler complains again. I put it back, it's fine. So this is another improvement over switch statements, because you get a lot of assistance from the compiler to make sure that you're either handling all your cases or you specify a default case. And it also encourages you to follow best practice. So instead of using things like integers, you could define an enum and use that instead. So I'm just going to invoke this new method just to show that it actually does work. And of course, instead of passing in a number, I pass in an instance of the enum. It's going to say Monday there. And on this, so for the first one we see Whirlwind Wednesday, and for the switch expression we see Manic Monday, because that's the value that we passed in. So this is already a significant improvement over switch statements, as we can see, but that's not all there is to switch expressions. So I'm just going to move on to a slightly different scenario where we want to have case fall through. In other words, we're not going to break on every case. We want to have a common message for certain days of the week. So I'll just show you what I mean. I'm just going to replicate this message, or this method rather, and I'm just going to call it v2. What I want to do now is I want to display a message depending on where we are in the week. So when we're at the start of the week, I would consider the start of the week as Monday and Tuesday. I want a common message to be returned. So the way I would do that is I'm not going to specify anything for Monday, but for Tuesday I'm going to say something like long week ahead. So what this means is even if we passed in 1 for Monday, it would fall through, it would hit case 2, and we would see this message. So for both Monday and Tuesday, we would see the same message. And for Wednesday, I actually do want a particular message. I'm going to say halfway through the week. And for Thursday and Friday, I'm going to have a common message. I'm going to say, looking forward to the weekend. And for Saturday and Sunday, it is the weekend, so I'm going to say, enjoying the weekend. So I'm just gonna call this new method v2 with Monday, and the third output there, it says long week ahead for Monday. And if it's say Saturday, I'm enjoying the weekend. So that's all good. But looking at the code, it's not a very intuitive way of coding. As you can see, it looks a bit funny, but also you have to know, which cases to leave blank and which cases to apply some logic to. So switch expressions let you improve upon this as well. So let me show you how. I'm just going to replicate my switch expression version of the method and have a version 2 of this as well. So if we want to achieve the same thing that we did with this method up here, we don't need to rely on case fall throughs and break statements. What we can do is we can bunch cases together like this. So we can define a case for more than one value. But when we do that, we need to use an arrow like this. And also you don't need the yield anymore. If you specify a value there, that just gets yielded implicitly. And it makes your code even more compact. You can't have a combination of arrows and colons. As you can see, the compiler is not happy here. So that becomes an arrow as well. And we just put the correct message there. So for Monday and Tuesday, it's the same message. For Wednesday, we want this message. Then for Thursday and Friday, we're looking forward to the weekend. And finally for Saturday and Sunday, we're enjoying the weekend. So, looking at this implementation here, you can see how compact it is. It's much cleaner and much more elegant compared to this. I'm supposed to call this method get expression of the day. So now I need to illustrate that this works as well. Get expression of the day version 2. Let's call it with Monday again. And run this. And it says long week ahead. Saturday. Enjoying the weekend. So we can see how the use of switch expressions makes your code cleaner, and it also aids you in following best practice.